So as per usual, we have huge updates coming out of the Middle East. And to break down the very latest with regard to Israel retaliating against Iran, we've got Dr. Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Good to be with you guys again.
Yeah, of course. So let's put this Wall Street Journal article up on the screen. You know, I referred to these in a shorthand as retaliatory attacks. Of course, we know that that's not exactly accurate, since this is just retaliation to the latest Iranian attacks, which were retaliation for Israeli attacks. But in any case, we've got a Wall Street Journal article here arguing that Biden pushed Israel to limit their attacks on Iran, yet still inflict a heavy blow. You know, based on what we know about the sites that Israel did strike, what can we say about the level of these attacks and the potential response?
Well, the interesting thing is we actually cannot say that much. Clearly, the Israelis struck. Clearly, they were successful in striking at least 20 sites. They left about 5 people killed. That number may increase. There's definitely been some damage. The extent to which that damage has occurred, however, is unclear. The Israelis are saying that they've essentially taken out all of Iran's long-range anti-defense missiles and systems. The Iranians are, of course, downplaying it. I think the Israelis are exaggerating. The truth may be somewhere in between, but we frankly just don't know quite yet. But this is very important, because if the Israeli narrative turns out to be true, and I'm personally skeptical, part of the reason I'm skeptical is because it actually serves the interests of those in Israel who are in power, who want to see further escalation. Because the argument they're essentially making is, see, Iran no longer has long-range anti-defense missiles. As a result, it is going to be relatively easy now to strike the nuclear program. What are we waiting for? Let's just go for it, and then hoping that either the Biden administration or the Trump administration would go along with it. I'm very skeptical of this for several reasons. A, because we don't know quite yet the extent of the damage. We don't know how long it will take the Iranians to recuperate from whatever that damage is. But also, no one thought that the danger with striking Iran's nuclear program was Iran's anti-defense missiles. That has not been the reason as to why the strikes have not taken place. The reason why the strikes hasn't taken place is because it's quite clear, if the nuclear sites are struck, the Iranians will weaponize their program. They will leave the NPT. And given how deeply much of the program is underground, the U.S. itself has made the assessment that with or without anti-defense missiles in place, the ability to actually take out the facilities underground is very, very limited. If the U.S. has that calculation, rest assured, the Israelis simply cannot do it. So there's a lot of fog and a lot of smoke right now, and it is all about establishing various narratives. And from the Israeli side, of course, the narrative they want is, see, this was easy. The Iranians couldn't do that much about it. What are we waiting for? Unleash us and allow us to take out everything.
Yeah. So, Dr. Parsi, in terms of the Iranian regime and just the way they have reacted to this, what does it tell us? Is it similar to last time around where we consider the matter closed? How is the message that is currently coming out of media and others in response to this?
So initially, almost even before any real assessment could be made of what the damage was, they were downplaying it, which sent a clear signal they don't want to see further escalation. They're not the ones who started this exchange of direct fire between Israel and Iran. That's what the Israelis started on April 1st when they struck the Iranian consular section of the embassy in Damascus. But as time has passed, and as we have seen, most importantly, that there has been casualties, you are seeing things happening in the Iranian debate in which there is a lot of anger and a lot of belief that not responding may actually be a mistake. What they don't want to see is the idea of striking Tehran becoming normalized in the same way that striking Damascus or striking Beirut has become normalized for the Israelis. They do it regularly. It's hardly news any longer, certainly not in the mainstream American media. They almost never report on those things. The Iranians don't want to end up in that situation in which Israel striking Tehran will become a normalized issue. And that is one of the pressures internally for them to do something. The question, of course, is what could they do without sparking the larger war that the Israelis want and the Iranians do not want?
Interesting. Yeah, that's such a great point I hadn't thought about the normalization of those Israeli attacks on Beirut and on Damascus. I wanted to ask you what you made of this reporting inside of the Wall Street Journal piece we just had up. They say that the White House used Israel's request for a THAAD anti-missile battery as leverage after the Pentagon indicated Israel wanted the system to bolster its defenses against Iran. Tony Blinken recommended at a meeting with Biden, the U.S. agree to send it only if Israel promised to strike only military sites. What do you make of that assertion of the use of the THAAD anti-missile battery, basically to sort of coerce the Israelis into not striking nuclear sites?
I think this whole thing is a bit of a fallacy. I don't doubt that the story is true, and I wouldn't doubt that Blinken would have agreed to the THAADs even if he got nothing from the Israelis. Mm-hmm. But bottom line is the fact that they didn't strike the nuclear facilities may not be that relevant if this continues to escalate. And there's much to indicate that even though the Iranians may not respond quickly, that this is not the end of this story. This may be the end of one chapter. But unfortunately, as long as the United States helps Israel reduce the cost of its own escalations by rushing in and protecting it every time it happens, and every time the Israelis want to escalate, instead of saying, no, we don't want a war in the region that can drag us in, instead we say, well, just strike here, just strike there, and we'll give you more missiles so you don't have to pay the cost of it. If that is our approach, all we're doing is that we're ensuring escalation. We're just ensuring it at a slower pace than if we didn't provide those, if we didn't push back against those initial targets. Mm-hmm. This may very well end up with strikes against the nuclear sites and a complete war. So just slowing it down, which is what the Biden administration at best have done, is simply not good enough if we believe that the U.S.'s interest in all of this is for us not to get dragged into another war in the region.
Which I think we all do, at least here. And that's my question. My last question really is, how do you think that the Israelis will calibrate and will they escalate if Donald Trump does win the election in 8 days?
I think there's a degree of nervousness in Israel. Israelis I've spoken to, they're not saying that they don't prefer Trump, but there is a degree of nervousness because they know very well that if Trump changes his mind and doesn't want to see this continue, there's going to be a high cost for the Israelis to do to Trump what they have done to Biden. They have disregarded almost every red line that Biden has put forward. Biden himself has clearly not been serious about those different things. But the Israelis have taken pleasure in humiliating Biden publicly. I don't think the Israelis would do that easily with Trump. They know that the reactions can be quite unpredictable. I think it's also very interesting that as much as the Trump administration is saying things such as, you got to do what you got to do, go do the job, etc., they're not saying anything about what the U.S. would do in terms of supporting Israel. And one line that I think is coming out of the Trump camp is, we don't want to restrain the Israelis, but we also don't want to help them do what they're doing because we don't want to get into a war. J.D. Vance himself said in an interview that it's a clear interest of the U.S. not to get into a war with Iran. So I think you may end up seeing a policy in which the pretense of restrictions that I think the Biden administration has put forward will simply not be there. There may even be active encouragement, but perhaps without a very large part, if not all, of the material support that the Biden administration has provided Israel.
How does that square with some of the significant interest groups on the Republican side, not only, the evangelical base, which has been Trump's largest, most core supporters, highest level of support, who actually they have a higher favorability rating for Bibi Netanyahu than American Jews do. Miriam Adelson being one of his largest donors, a commitment to Israel being her largest issue. Reporting suggests that, one of the things that she wants out of Trump is for him to allow Israel to annex the West Bank, officially. Within the Republican Party, you have, versus the Democratic Party, you have much stronger support for Israel, for shipping weapons to Israel, much more hawkish views vis-a-vis Iran. So how does that Trump assessment square with some of those critical interest groups and donors on the Republican side?
You're absolutely right, Krystal, that is a critical element within the Trump camp as well, that you have those who not only want to continue to do this, but also want to see even greater American support for it. And I don't think that the battle within the Trump administration has been entirely squared out when it comes to this. I'm just judging it based on what Trump himself has said so far, which is going quite far out there in terms of expressing support for Israel, but saying very little about what the U.S. role would be. And then you listen to J.D. Vance, and there you have a bit more detail in terms of even being more in favor of not putting restrictions on Israel, but also even more clear about the U.S. not necessarily being part of it and not getting involved in the war. I think at the end of the day, we have to be very frank. We do not know what the Trump administration would do because it is quite unpredictable, particularly mindful of the very elements that you mentioned. And this is going back to Saagar's question, part of the reason why there's a degree of nervousness in Israel about Trump as well. They know that in many ways it may actually be much better for them, but they also know that if Trump were to change his mind and decide to go on a path that they're not happy with, they probably cannot do too much about it.
Very interesting.
Dr. Parsi, always great to have your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you,
Thank you
sir.
so much for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
You too.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.